Madison Collins had never felt more alive than she did at that moment, standing in the bathroom mirror of their small apartment, carefully applying the final touches of mascara before their departure. Her reflection showed a young woman glowing with happiness, her eyes sparkling with the kind of joy that only comes from finding your person in this vast, often lonely world. At 28, she had almost given up on the idea of a fairy tale romance. But then Tyler walked into her life at that coffee shop 6 months ago, and everything changed. Tyler Matthews was everything she had dreamed of, but never dared to hope. Kind, thoughtful, with an infectious laugh that made even her worst days brighter. When he proposed 3 months ago on the very bench where they had their first real conversation, Madison felt like her heart might burst from pure happiness. The wedding had been perfect, small, intimate, surrounded by the people who mattered most. But now, as they prepared for their honeymoon, Madison felt a different kind of excitement building in her chest. "Are you almost ready, Mrs. Matthews?" Tyler called from the bedroom, and Madison felt that familiar flutter in her stomach at hearing her new name, Mrs. Matthews. She was still getting used to it, but oh, how she loved the sound of it. "Just 5 more minutes," she called back, though she was nearly finished. She wanted to look perfect for their first adventure as a married couple. They had decided early in their planning process that their honeymoon wouldn't be typical. No crowded resorts in Mexico, no tourist-heavy beaches. In Hawaii, they wanted something special, something that was uniquely theirs. That's when Tyler had found the listing on Airbnb. Madison still remembered the moment he called her into the room, his laptop open to the most breathtaking property she had ever seen. A rustic cabin nestled high in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, surrounded by ancient trees, and promising the kind of solitude that felt like a luxury in their busy lives. The photos had taken her breath away, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the valley below. A stone fireplace that looked like something from a magazine, exposed wooden beams that spoke of craftsmanship from another era. There was a wraparound deck with Adirondack chairs perfectly positioned to watch the sunrise. And best of all, a hot tub nestled in a private corner of the deck, surrounded by tall pines that would shield them from any prying eyes. Not that there would be any, given how isolated the property was. "Listen to this description," Tyler had said, his voice filled with excitement as he read from the screen. "Experience complete disconnection from the outside world in this secluded mountain retreat. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just you, nature, and the kind of peace that's impossible to find in the modern world. Perfect for couples looking to reconnect with each other and with the natural beauty of the Blue Ridge Mountains." Madison had felt her heart race with anticipation. After the stress of wedding planning, the demands of their jobs, and the constant buzz of notifications from their phones, the idea of complete disconnection sounded like paradise. They could talk for hours without interruption, cook meals together in the cabin's rustic kitchen, sit by the fire, and plan their future as husband and wife. The reviews had been glowing. Previous guests raved about the tranquility, the stunning views, and the attention to detail in every aspect of the cabin. One review particularly stuck with Madison. "This place saved our marriage. We remembered why we fell in love in the first place. Can't wait to come back." Another guest had written, "5 stars isn't enough, this is heaven on earth." Now, as she gathered her toiletries and placed them carefully in her suitcase, Madison felt that same excitement bubbling up inside her. Tyler had already loaded most of their luggage into their SUV, and she could hear him moving around the apartment, doing his final checks to make sure everything was turned off and secured. "Did you remember to pack the good wine?" she called out, referring to the bottle of champagne they had been saving since their engagement. "Already in the cooler," he replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Along with all those fancy cheeses you picked out." Madison grinned. To herself, she had spent an embarrassing amount of time at the gourmet market, selecting the perfect array of cheeses, chocolates, and other treats for their romantic getaway. This was their honeymoon, after all. They deserved to indulge a little. The drive to the cabin would take about 4 hours, winding through increasingly remote mountain roads until they reached their destination. Tyler had studied the route carefully, printing out detailed directions. Since GPS wouldn't be reliable in such a remote area, the host had even included a hand-drawn map in their welcome. information, complete with landmarks to watch for along the way. As Madison zipped up her suitcase, she felt a momentary flutter of nervousness. It wasn't like her to feel anxious about travel. She and Tyler had taken several trips together during their relationship, but something about the isolation of this particular destination gave her pause. Maybe it was just pre-honeymoon jitters, the weight of this being their first trip as a married couple. She shook off the feeling and focused instead on all the wonderful things they had planned. Long hikes through the mountain trails, evening, soaks in the hot tub under the stars, lazy mornings with coffee on the deck, watching the mist rise from the valley. Tyler had even packed his guitar, joking that he would serenade her every evening of their stay. "Ready when you are, beautiful," Tyler said, appearing in the doorway with his characteristic warm smile. He looked handsome in his casual hiking clothes, his dark hair slightly tousled and his eyes bright with anticipation. Madison felt that familiar surge of love and gratitude that she got to spend the rest of her life with this wonderful man. "I'm ready," she said, grabbing her purse and taking one last look around their apartment. When they returned, they would officially begin their life together as husband and wife. This trip felt like the perfect bridge between their old lives and their new one. The drive began beautifully. They took turns choosing music, sang along to their favorite songs, and played silly road trip games like they were teenagers again. Tyler reached over to hold her hand whenever he didn't need both hands for driving, and Madison felt perfectly content. The suburban sprawl gradually gave way to rolling hills, then to more dramatic mountain terrain as they climbed higher into the Blue Ridge. About 3 hours into the drive, as they navigated increasingly narrow and winding roads, Madison noticed that Tyler was checking his phone more frequently at red lights and stop signs. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Just making sure we stay on track," he said, but she caught a slight furrow in his brow. "The cell service is getting pretty spotty. Up here, I want to make sure we don't miss any turns." Madison nodded, understanding his concern. The roads had become quite remote, with long stretches between any signs of civilization. They passed the occasional mailbox or driveway disappearing into the trees, but for the most part, they seemed to be alone in the world. It was both thrilling and slightly unnerving. "There," Tyler said with relief, pointing to a small wooden sign partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. "Pine Ridge Trail, that's our turn." The road, if it could even be called a road, was more like a well-maintained dirt path winding through dense forest. Their SUV handled it well, but Madison found herself gripping the door handle as they bumped and jostled over ruts and rocks. Ancient trees towered on both sides, their branches intertwining overhead to create a green tunnel that filtered the afternoon sunlight into dancing patterns. "This is really remote," Madison murmured, not entirely sure if she was excited or nervous about that fact. "That's the point," Tyler said, reaching over to squeeze her hand reassuringly. "Complete privacy for my beautiful wife." The endearment made her smile, pushing away her momentary unease. This was what they wanted: solitude, privacy, a chance to focus entirely on each other. And judging by the photos they had seen, the payoff would be spectacular. After another 20 minutes of careful driving, the trees began to thin, and suddenly they emerged into a clearing that took Madison's breath away. The cabin sat perfectly, positioned on a slight rise, just as stunning as the photos had promised. The afternoon sun caught the windows, making them glitter like jewels against the dark wood of the structure. Beyond the cabin, the land dropped away dramatically, offering a view of the valley that stretched for miles in every direction. "Tyler," Madison whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It's perfect." And it was. The cabin looked like something from a dream. Rustic but elegant, substantial but not ostentatious. A wraparound porch beckoned with comfortable-looking furniture, and Madison could already imagine herself curled up in one of those chairs with a cup of coffee and a good book. Smoke was actually rising from the chimney, which struck her as strange since they hadn't arrived yet. "Looks like the host got a fire started for us," Tyler said, noticing her gaze. "That's a nice touch." They parked near the front porch and climbed out, both stretching after the long drive. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and wood smoke. The silence was profound. No traffic noise, no neighbors, no sounds of civilization at all. except for the gentle whisper of wind through the trees and the distant call of a bird. She couldn't identify. Tyler retrieved their suitcases while Madison explored the immediate area around the cabin. Everything was exactly as described. The hot tub tucked discreetly on the side deck, the comfortable outdoor furniture, the spectacular view that seemed to stretch forever. She pulled out her phone to take a photo, wanting to share this moment with her family, but noticed that she had no service at all. "No signal," she called to Tyler, who was struggling with their largest suitcase. "Perfect," he called back with a grin. "No distractions for the next 5 days." Madison felt a small pang at the thought of being completely cut off from the outside world, but she pushed it aside. This was about them, about their marriage, about starting their life together. Everything else could wait. The front door was unlocked, with a key hanging from a rustic wooden sign that read, "Welcome Collins Matthews Party." Madison felt a warm glow at seeing their names together like that. Inside, the cabin was even more beautiful than the photos had suggested. The main room featured that gorgeous stone fireplace with a crackling fire already burning, comfortable leather furniture arranged to take advantage of the view, and warm wood surfaces everywhere that gave the space a cozy, intimate feeling. Tyler set down their luggage and immediately pulled her into his arms. "So, Mrs. Matthews," he said, his voice soft and loving, "what do you think of our honeymoon suite?" "I think," Madison said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him, "that we made the perfect choice." They spent the next hour exploring every corner of the cabin. The kitchen was well equipped with everything they would need to prepare romantic meals. The bedroom featured a king-size bed with luxurious linens and another spectacular view, and the bathroom included a deep soaking tub that Madison was already planning to use. As the afternoon wore on, they unpacked their belongings and settled into the space. Tyler got the wine chilling while Madison arranged their gourmet treats. On the kitchen counter, everything felt perfect, magical even. This was exactly what they had dreamed of for their honeymoon. When evening began to fall, Tyler suggested they take their champagne out to the hot tub to watch the sunset. Madison changed into her swimsuit, feeling slightly self-conscious but excited. As newlyweds, there was something deliciously romantic about sharing a hot tub under the open sky. The water was perfectly heated, and as they settled in with their champagne, Madison felt all her earlier nervousness melt away. This was paradise. Tyler wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close as they watched the sky begin to change colors above the mountains. "Thank you," Madison said softly. "For what?" "For finding this place, for planning all of this, for making our honeymoon so perfect." Tyler kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for saying yes when I proposed. Thank you for becoming my wife. Thank you for being exactly what I've been looking for my whole life." Madison felt tears prick her eyes, the happy kind that come from feeling overwhelmed with gratitude and love. As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, she couldn't imagine being anywhere else in the world. They took photos with Tyler's phone, the last photos they would be able to share with family until they returned home. Madison sent a quick text to her mother. "Made it safely. Even more beautiful than the pictures. See you in 5 days." She managed to hit send just before losing signal completely. Later that evening, after a dinner of cheese and wine eaten by the fireplace, they decided to explore the immediate area around the cabin. Tyler brought a flashlight, and they walked hand in hand around the perimeter of the property. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush and the distant call of an owl. "It's so quiet," Madison observed. "I don't think I've ever been somewhere this quiet." "City girl," Tyler teased gently. "This is what peace sounds like." Madison laughed, squeezing his hand. "I could get used to this." They discovered a small garden area behind the cabin with what looked like herbs and vegetables growing in neat rows. A narrow path led from the garden toward the tree line, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. "I wonder where that goes," Madison mused, shining the flashlight beam down the path. "Probably just a hiking trail," Tyler said. "We can explore it tomorrow if you want." Madison nodded, though something about the path made her feel slightly uneasy. Maybe it was just the darkness, or the way the trees seemed to close in around it, but she found herself stepping closer to Tyler. Back inside the cabin, they settled in front of the fire with more wine. Tyler had brought his guitar as promised, and he played some of their favorite songs, while Madison curled up beside him on the couch. The combination of the wine, the warmth of the fire, and the emotional intensity of the day began to make her drowsy. "I think I'm ready for bed," she said, stifling a yawn. "Me too," Tyler agreed, setting aside his guitar. "Tomorrow we can start exploring those hiking trails the host mentioned." As they got ready for bed, Madison felt completely content. The bathroom mirror reflected a happy, relaxed woman who looked like she was exactly where she belonged. This was what marriage was supposed to feel like, this sense of partnership, of being a team, of facing the world together. The bedroom was perfectly comfortable, with blackout curtains that promised they could sleep as late as they wanted. Tyler wrapped his arms around her as they settled under the covers, and Madison felt that perfect sense of safety and love that comes from being held by the person you trust most in the world. "Sweet dreams, Mrs. Matthews," Tyler whispered in the darkness. "Sweet dreams, Mr. Matthews," she whispered back. Madison fell asleep feeling grateful for every decision that had led them to this moment, this cabin, this man, this beginning of their life together. If she had known what the next morning would bring, she might have held on to that feeling of perfect happiness just a little bit longer. She might have paid more attention to the small details that seemed slightly off, the path behind the cabin that wasn't mentioned in any of the property descriptions, the way the silence sometimes felt too complete, the fact that the host had lit the fire before their arrival, but they hadn't seen any evidence of another person being there recently. But in that moment, wrapped in Tyler's arms and listening to the absolute silence of the mountain night, Madison felt nothing but peace and anticipation for the days ahead. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, more time to explore their beautiful surroundings, and the luxury of waking up slowly without any obligations, except to enjoy each other's company. She drifted off to sleep with a smile on her face, completely unaware that this would be the last normal night of her life. Madison woke slowly, consciousness returning in gentle waves as morning light filtered through the bedroom curtains. For a moment she felt disoriented. This wasn't their apartment bedroom, and the silence was so complete it was almost startling. Then memory returned. The cabin, their honeymoon. Tyler beside her in the bed. She smiled and stretched, feeling wonderfully rested and peaceful. Turning to share a good morning kiss with her husband, Madison found the bed empty beside her. Tyler's pillow still held the impression of his head, and the sheets were warm, so he hadn't been gone long. She could hear movement in the kitchen, the soft sounds of someone preparing breakfast. "Tyler," she called out, her voice still thick with sleep. "Morning, beautiful," came his reply from the kitchen. "I'm making coffee. Take your time." Madison smiled and snuggled back into the comfortable bed for a few more minutes. Through the window, she could see morning mist rising from the valley below, creating an ethereal, dreamlike quality to the landscape. Everything about this place felt magical, like they had stepped into some alternate reality where nothing existed except the two of them and this perfect sanctuary. Eventually, the smell of coffee and what she thought might be bacon drew her from the bed. She found Tyler in the kitchen, still in his pajama pants and a t-shirt, humming softly as he moved around the space with easy familiarity. "You're up early," she observed, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind and resting her cheek against his back. "I wanted to surprise you with breakfast," he said, turning in her arms to give her a proper good morning kiss. "Plus, I woke up and couldn't get back to sleep. Too excited about having a whole day with nowhere to be except right here with you." Madison felt that familiar flutter of happiness that Tyler's words always brought her. Even after all these months together, he still had the ability to make her feel like the most important person in the world. Breakfast was lovely. Perfectly prepared eggs, crispy bacon, and coffee that tasted better than anything they made at home. They ate at the small dining table positioned to take advantage of the spectacular view, planning their day between bites. "I thought we could explore some of those hiking trails," Tyler suggested. The host left a map showing several different routes depending on how adventurous we're feeling. Madison nodded enthusiastically. "That sounds perfect. I brought my good hiking boots specifically for that." After breakfast, they prepared for their hike with the kind of methodical care that comes from experience. Both of them enjoyed outdoor activities, and they had learned to be prepared for anything when venturing into unfamiliar territory. Water bottles, snacks, first aid, kit, map and compass, extra layers of clothing in case the weather changed. Everything went into Tyler's hiking backpack. The morning was crisp, but not cold, perfect for physical activity. They decided to start with a moderate trail that the EE host's map indicated would take them to a scenic overlook about 2 miles from the cabin. According to the description, it offered panoramic views of the valley and was especially beautiful in the morning light. The trail began at the edge of the cabin's property, marked by a small wooden sign that was weathered but readable. The path was well maintained, winding through forest that felt ancient and untouched. Towering oaks and maples created a canopy overhead, with occasional clearings that offered glimpses of the sky and distant mountains. Madison found herself relaxing into the rhythm of walking, enjoying the feeling of being surrounded by nature, and having Tyler all to herself. They talked about everything and nothing, their plans for when they returned home, places they wanted to travel in the future, silly memories from their courtship. It was exactly the kind of easy, intimate conversation that she had been looking forward to during their honeymoon. About an hour into their hike, they reached the promised overlook, and the view was every bit as spectacular as advertised. Where they valley spread out below them like a patchwork quilt, with the morning mist still clinging to the lower elevations. In the distance, more mountain ridges marched toward the horizon in shades of blue and purple. "This is incredible," Madison breathed, settling onto a large rock that seemed perfectly positioned for taking in the view. Tyler sat beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Worth the hike?" "Worth everything," she said, leaning into his warmth. "I'm so glad we chose somewhere like this instead of a resort." They spent nearly an hour at the overlook, taking photos with Tyler's phone, and simply enjoying the peace and beauty of their surroundings. Madison felt a deep sense of contentment that she wanted to memorize. The feeling of the sun warming her face, the sound of Tyler's quiet breathing beside her, the vastness of the natural world spread out below them. Eventually, they decided to head back, taking their time and enjoying the walk even more now that they weren't focused on reaching a destination. The forest felt friendly and welcoming, full of interesting sights and sounds. Madison collected a few particularly beautiful leaves to press in her journal, and Tyler pointed out various birds and wildlife signs along the trail. It was late afternoon by the time they returned to the cabin, both pleasantly tired and looking forward to relaxing for the evening. Tyler suggested they prepare an early dinner and then spend the evening in the hot tub, watching the stars come out. "That sounds perfect," Madison agreed, already imagining how good the hot water would feel on her hiking-tired muscles. They worked together to prepare a simple but elegant meal, using some of the ingredients they had brought from home. Tyler grilled steaks on the cabin's gas grill, while Madison prepared a salad and opened a bottle of red wine. Everything felt easy and natural, like they had been coming to this cabin for years. As they ate dinner on the deck, Madison felt overwhelmed with gratitude for this time together. "I don't want this to end," she said softly. "It doesn't have to," Tyler replied. "I mean, the honeymoon will end, but us being together like this is just the beginning." Madison smiled, raising her wine glass in a toast. "To beginnings." "To beginnings," Tyler echoed, clinking his glass against hers. After dinner, they changed into their swimsuits and settled into the hot tub as the sun began to set behind the mountains. The water was perfectly heated, and Madison felt all the tension from the day's hiking melt away. Tyler pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky change colors and the first stars begin to appear. "Look," Tyler said, softly pointing upward. "You can actually see the Milky Way from here." Madison looked up and gasped. Without any light pollution, the night sky was more brilliant than she had ever seen it. The stars seemed close enough to touch, and the Milky Way stretched across the darkness like a cosmic river. "It's beautiful," she whispered, feeling slightly overwhelmed by the immensity of it all. They spent hours in the hot tub, talking and stargazing, and simply enjoying each other's company. Madison felt like she could stay there forever, safe and warm and completely connected to the man she loved. Eventually, though, the late hour and the wine began to make them drowsy. They reluctantly left the hot tub and prepared for bed, both feeling deeply satisfied with their perfect day. "Tomorrow we should explore that path behind the cabin," Tyler suggested as they settled under the covers. Madison felt a small flutter of unease at the mention of the path. She couldn't quite explain why, but something about it had bothered her the night before. "Maybe," she said non-committally. "Let's see what the weather is like." Tyler didn't seem to notice her hesitation. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep, and Madison found herself alone with her thoughts in the darkness. She told herself she was being silly. It was just a path through the woods, probably leading to another scenic overlook, or perhaps to a neighboring property. There was no reason to feel nervous about it. Maybe it was just the isolation getting to her. She wasn't used to being so completely cut off from the outside world. Eventually, she drifted off to sleep, but her dreams were restless. She found herself walking down a dark path through dense forest, searching for something she couldn't name. In the dream, Tyler was calling her name, but she couldn't find him. She kept walking deeper into the forest, but the path seemed to stretch on forever, and his voice grew fainter and fainter until she could barely hear it at all. Madison woke with a start, her heart pounding. The bedroom was dark and quiet, and Tyler was sleeping peacefully beside her. She checked the bedside clock, 2:47 a.m. The dream had felt so real that she found herself listening carefully for any sounds from outside, but there was nothing except the usual whisper of wind through the trees. She tried to go back to sleep, but something felt different about the silence. It seemed deeper somehow, more complete than it had been earlier. Even the wind had stopped, leaving an absolute quiet that felt almost oppressive. Madison slipped carefully out of bed, trying not to wake Tyler, and moved to the window. She pulled back the curtain slightly and peered out into the darkness. The hot tub was a pale shape on the deck, and beyond that the forest was a wall of black. She couldn't see any lights anywhere, not even the distant glow of a neighboring house or a passing car on some far-off road. For the first time since arriving at the cabin, Madison felt truly isolated. Not peacefully alone, but isolated in a way that made her feel vulnerable and exposed. She shook her head, telling herself she was being ridiculous. This was exactly what they had wanted: complete privacy and solitude. There was nothing to be afraid of. But as she stood at the window looking out into the absolute darkness, Madison couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her back. She returned to bed and eventually fell into an uneasy sleep, but her dreams remained troubled. She dreamed of paths that led nowhere, of voices calling from deep in the forest, of Tyler disappearing into shadows that seemed to swallow him whole. When she woke the next morning, Tyler was already up again, and she could smell coffee brewing. In the kitchen, sunlight was streaming through the windows, banishing the fears and unease of the night. Everything looked normal and beautiful, and Madison felt foolish for her middle-of-the-night anxiety. "Morning, sleepyhead," Tyler called, cheerfully. "I was starting to think you were going to sleep all day." Madison glanced at the clock and was surprised to see it was nearly 10 o'clock. She usually woke much earlier, but the combination of the hiking, the wine, and her restless night had clearly taken their toll. "I had strange dreams," she said, joining Tyler in the kitchen. "About what?" "I'm not sure exactly. Getting lost in the woods, I think. It was probably just because we're somewhere so remote." Tyler nodded sympathetically. "The silence can take some getting used to if you're not accustomed to it, but you'll adjust. Today will be even better than yesterday." Madison accepted the coffee he offered and hoped he was right. In the bright morning light, surrounded by the familiar comfort of Tyler's presence, her nighttime fears seemed silly and overblown. This was their honeymoon, their perfect romantic getaway. She wasn't going to let her imagination spoil it. But as they planned their activities for the day, Madison found herself avoiding any mention of that path behind the cabin. Something deep in her gut told her it was better left unexplored. Little did she know that by the time the sun set that evening, the question of exploring the path would become irrelevant. By then, they would have much bigger concerns than Madison's mysterious dreams or her inexplicable unease about a simple woodland trail. By then, their perfect honeymoon would have become something else entirely, something that would leave their families searching for answers that might never come and leave investigators with more questions than clues. But for now, in the bright morning light of their second day at the cabin, Madison and Tyler Matthews were still just a young couple on their honeymoon, planning another perfect day in their mountain paradise. The third morning at the Easy cabin dawned gray and overcast, with a heavy mist that seemed to muffle all sound and shroud the forest in an ethereal, almost otherworldly atmosphere. Madison woke feeling unrefreshed, despite sleeping late, her dreams once again plagued by images of dark paths and distant voices calling her name. Tyler was already up, standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching the mist swirl through the trees. Something in his posture struck Madison as tense, different from his usual relaxed morning demeanor. "Everything okay?" she asked, moving to stand beside him. "Just watching the weather," he said, but his voice carried a note of concern. "It's supposed to clear up this afternoon, but right now you can barely see 50 feet into the forest." Madison looked out at the dense fog and felt that familiar flutter of unease. The mist transformed their beautiful mountain retreat into something that felt isolated and vaguely threatening. She could barely make out the hot tub on the deck, and the tree line had completely disappeared into gray nothingness. "Maybe today would be good for staying inside," she suggested, surprised by the relief she felt at the idea. "We could read. By the fire, maybe cook something elaborate for dinner." Tyler nodded, though she caught him glancing toward the window several more times during breakfast, as if he were waiting for something or watching for movement in the fog. They spent the morning contentedly enough. Tyler built up the fire while Madison organized their photos from the past 2 days, and they took turns reading aloud from a novel she had brought. It should have been perfectly romantic and cozy, but Madison found herself struggling to concentrate. Every small sound from outside, a branch falling, the distant call of a bird, the whisper of wind through the trees, seemed amplified in the muffled quiet of the fog. Around noon, Tyler's restlessness became more apparent. He kept moving to different windows, looking out into the gray nothingness, checking and rechecking his phone even though they both knew there was no signal. "Tyler, what's wrong?" Madison finally asked, setting down her book. He turned from the window, and she was surprised to see genuine concern in his expression. "I've been thinking about something. Yesterday, when we were on our hike, did you notice anything unusual?" Madison felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" "I'm probably just being paranoid," Tyler said, running a hand through his hair. "But a couple of times I felt like we were being watched. Not by an animal, by a person. And once, when we were at the overlook, I could have sworn I heard footsteps on the trail behind us, but when I looked, there was no one there." Madison stared at him, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the cool morning air. "Why didn't you say anything yesterday?" "Because I figured I was imagining things, but now, with this fog, and being unable to see anything beyond the immediate area around the cabin, I don't know, something feels off." Madison set down her coffee cup with hands that weren't quite steady. "I've been feeling it too, ever since we arrived, really. Like something about this place isn't quite right." They looked at each other for a long moment, both clearly relieved to discover they weren't alone in their unease, but also disturbed by the confirmation that something was indeed wrong. "Maybe we should consider leaving a day early," Tyler said quietly. "I hate to cut our honeymoon short, but our safety is more important than a romantic getaway," Madison finished, and Tyler nodded gratefully. The decision, once made, brought immediate relief to both of them. They would pack up after lunch and drive back to civilization, back to cell phone service and other people, and the comfortable normalcy of their regular lives. They could always plan another romantic trip for later, somewhere that didn't leave them feeling watched and isolated. But as they began to gather their belongings, the fog outside began to lift, revealing the forest in patches and glimpses. And that's when Tyler made the discovery that changed everything. "Madison," he called from the bedroom, his voice strange and tight. "Come here now." She found him standing at the bedroom window, staring out toward the back of the cabin with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Look," he said, pointing toward the edge of the property. Madison followed his gaze and felt her blood turn cold. Where the garden and the path behind the cabin should have been, there was now a clearly defined trail cutting through the forest. Not the narrow, overgrown path they had noticed their first night, but a wide, well-used trail that looked like it had been there for years. That wasn't there before. Madison whispered. I know it wasn't, Tyler said grimly. I walked around the entire property our first night, remember? There was just a little footpath that disappeared into the underbrush. This is completely different. The trail was easily 6 feet wide, with clear signs of regular use. The vegetation had been cut back, the ground was well worn, and Madison could even see what looked like marker posts along the route disappearing into the forest. How is that possible? She asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Tyler was already moving away from the window, heading for the front door. I'm going to take a closer look. Tyler, no, Madison said, grabbing his arm. Whatever's going on, here we don't need to investigate it. We need to pack up and leave right now. But Tyler was already pulling on his jacket. I just want to see where it goes. Maybe there's a logical explanation. Maybe we just didn't notice it before because of the angle or the lighting. Madison wanted to argue, wanted to insist that they get in the car immediately and drive away from this place that was feeling more wrong by the minute. But she also knew Tyler well enough to recognize his determination. He wouldn't be able to leave without answers, and honestly, part of her needed to know too. Fine, she said, but I'm coming with you, and we don't go far. They walked around to the back of the cabin together, and up close, the trail was even more disturbing. It looked ancient and well-established, as if it had been there for decades. Madison knelt down and examined the packed earth, which showed clear signs of recent foot traffic. Multiple people, Tyler observed, crouching beside her. Different boot prints, different sizes, some of them look fresh, like within the last day or two. Madison felt a chill run down her spine. Tyler, we need to leave now. Something is very wrong here. But even as she said it, she found herself looking down the trail, wondering where it led and who had been using it. The rational part of her mind was screaming that they should get in their car and drive away as fast as possible. But another part of her, the part that had always been curious, that had always needed to understand things, wanted answers. Tyler stood up and dusted off his hands. 20 minutes, he said. We follow the trail for 20 minutes, see where it goes. Then we come back and pack up. Whatever we find, at least we'll know. Madison wanted to say no. Every instinct she had was telling her that following that trail was the worst possible decision they could make. But she also knew that if they left without investigating, she would spend the rest of her life wondering what they might have discovered. 20 minutes, she agreed reluctantly. But at the first sign of anything dangerous or strange, we turn around immediately. Tyler nodded and took her hand. Together, they stepped onto the mysterious trail that hadn't existed just 2 days earlier and began walking into the forest. The path was well maintained and easy to follow, winding through the trees with the kind of careful engineering that suggested it had been planned and constructed rather than simply worn by casual use. Every 100 yards or so, they encountered one of the marker posts Madison had seen from the window. Simple wooden stakes with numbers carved into them. It's like a numbered trail system, Tyler observed, the kind you'd find in a state park or a maintained recreation area. But this isn't a state park, Madison replied. This is supposed to be private property, and according to everything we were told, we're the only people who should be here. They walked in increasingly uncomfortable silence, both hyper-aware of every sound around them. The forest felt different from when they had hiked the official trails, darker, more oppressive, as if the trees themselves were watching their progress. About 15 minutes into their walk, they encountered something that made them both stop dead in their tracks. A small cleared area, perhaps 20 feet in diameter, with what appeared to be the remains of a campsite. Not an old, abandoned campsite, but one that showed signs of recent use. There were the blackened stones of a fire ring, with cold ashes that couldn't have been more than a day or two old. Several logs had been arranged as seating around the fire. Most disturbing of all, there were clear signs that multiple people had been here recently. Food wrappers partially buried in the dirt, cigarette butts, and what looked like the impression of several sleeping bags in the flattened grass. People have been camping here, Madison said, her voice barely above a whisper. Recently. Tyler was examining the fire ring, and when he looked up, his face was pale. Madison, these ashes are still warm. She stared at him, not quite processing what he was saying. What do you mean, warm? I mean, someone had a fire here within The last few hours, maybe even this morning. Madison felt the world seemed to tilt around her. That's impossible. We would have seen the smoke. We would have smelled it. Not necessarily, not with the fog this morning. And if they put it out before dawn... Tyler stood up and looked around the clearing with new urgency. We need to go, now. But as they turned to head back down the trail, they heard something that froze them both in place. Voices, distant but clearly human, coming from deeper in the forest. Multiple voices, speaking too quietly for the words to be distinguishable, but getting gradually closer. Madison grabbed Tyler's hand, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it must be audible. "Run," she whispered. They turned and ran back down the trail, no longer caring about stealth or caution. Behind them, the voices seemed to grow louder, though Madison couldn't tell if that was because their owners were moving closer or because fear was amplifying every sound. They didn't stop running until they reached the cabin, both gasping for breath and looking over their shoulders to see if they had been followed. The trail behind them remained empty, but that didn't make them feel any safer. "Pack," Tyler said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Pack everything right now. We're leaving." Madison didn't argue. They threw their belongings into suitcases, with none of the care they had used when unpacking, both of them moving with the efficiency born of genuine fear. Tyler loaded the car, while Madison did a final sweep of the cabin, making sure they hadn't left anything behind. As she was checking the bathroom one last time, Madison heard Tyler call her name from outside. His voice carried a note of urgency that made her drop the toiletry bag she was holding and run. She found him standing beside their SUV, staring at the front tires with an expression of disbelief and growing horror. Both front tires had been slashed, not damaged by a road hazard or worn down by use, but deliberately cut with something sharp. The cuts were clean and precise, clearly intentional, and recent enough that the rubber was still showing bright white where it had been severed. Madison felt her knees go weak. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Someone doesn't want us to leave." Tyler was already pulling out his phone, frantically checking for any sign of signal, but they both knew it was hopeless. They were completely cut off, with no way to call for help and no way to drive out of this increasingly nightmare situation. "What do we do?" Madison asked, hating the way her voice shook. Tyler looked around the clearing, his jaw set with determination despite the fear in his eyes. "We go back inside, lock all the doors and windows and wait for morning. Someone will notice we haven't checked out when we were supposed to. The rental agency, our families, someone will come looking for us." Madison nodded, though she wasn't. Sure, she believed it. Their families weren't expecting to hear from them until their return, and the rental agency probably wouldn't check on the property for days or even weeks. But what other choice did they have? They retreated to the cabin and secured it as best they could, checking every lock and making sure all the curtains were closed. Tyler found a carving knife in the kitchen and kept it close, though they both knew it would be of little use if whoever was out there really meant them harm. As darkness fell around the cabin, Madison and Tyler huddled together on the couch, listening to every sound from outside and wondering if they would live to see morning. Neither of them slept that night, and by dawn, both of them would be gone, leaving behind only questions that would puzzle investigators for years to come. The final hours of Madison and Tyler Matthews' honeymoon began in the pre-dawn darkness of their fourth day at the cabin. Neither had slept more than a few minutes at a time, taking turns keeping watch at the windows while the other tried unsuccessfully to rest. Every sound from outside, and there had been many, sent jolts of adrenaline through their already exhausted systems. Around 3 a.m., Tyler had spotted lights moving through the forest. Not flashlights, but something dimmer and more diffused like lanterns or candles. The lights had moved in a pattern that suggested multiple people walking along the mysterious trail, but they had disappeared before Tyler could get a clear count. Of how many? "They're out there," he had whispered to Madison, who was curled on the couch with the carving knife clutched in her hands. "I don't know what they want, but they're definitely out there." Madison had nodded silently, no longer surprised by anything about their situation. The cabin that had seemed like paradise just 3 days ago now felt like a trap, and she was beginning to wonder if their arrival here had been as random as they had thought. As the first pale light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, Tyler made a decision that would determine the course of the next few hours. "I'm going to try to fix the tires," he announced, setting down the cold cup of coffee he had been holding without drinking. "Tyler, no," Madison said immediately. "It's too dangerous. We should stay inside." "We can't stay inside forever," Tyler replied, though his voice betrayed his own fear. "If I can get us mobile, we can drive out of here. Even on damaged tires, we might be able to make it to a main road where we can get cell service and call for help." Madison wanted to argue, but she could see the logic in his plan, and more than that, she could see the determination in his eyes. Tyler had always been the type of person who needed to take action when faced with a problem, and the feeling of being trapped was eating away at him. "I'll keep watch from the window," she said finally. "If I see anything at all, I'll signal you to come back immediately." Tyler nodded and gathered the tools he thought he might need from the cabin's small utility closet. A tire repair kit had been included in their emergency supplies, and while it wouldn't fix a slashed tire completely, it might provide enough of a temporary solution to get them out of there. Madison positioned herself at the front window where she could see both Tyler and the surrounding forest. The morning mist was lighter than it had been the day before, but it still provided enough cover to make her nervous about what might be hiding just beyond her line of sight. Tyler worked quickly and efficiently, his movements betraying the urgency of their situation. He managed to get a temporary patch on the first tire and had begun inflating it when Madison saw something that made her blood freeze. Movement in the trees directly behind Tyler. Not the random movement of wildlife, but the deliberate, careful movement of someone trying to stay hidden while moving closer to the cabin. Madison tapped frantically on the window, their prearranged danger signal, but Tyler was focused on the tire pump and didn't immediately notice. The figure in the trees moved closer, and Madison could now see that it was definitely a person, dressed in dark clothing and moving with the careful stealth of someone who knew the terrain well. "Tyler!" she called out, abandoning their attempt at silence. "Behind you." Tyler spun around, dropping the tire pump, and for a moment he and the figure in the trees stared at each other across the clearing. Madison couldn't see the person's face from her vantage point, but something about their posture suggested they were as surprised to be spotted as Tyler was to see them. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Then the figure turned and melted, back into the forest with the fluid grace of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Tyler grabbed his tools and ran back to the cabin, his face pale but determined. "That's it," he said as soon as he was inside. "We're not waiting around anymore. Patches or no patches, we're driving out of here right now." Madison didn't argue. They threw their remaining belongings into bags without any attempt at organization, both of them moving with the desperate efficiency of people who knew their time was running out. The partially repaired tire held long enough to get them down the mountain road, though Tyler had to drive slowly and carefully to avoid putting too much stress on the temporary fix. Madison found herself holding her breath every time they hit a pothole or rough patch, waiting for the tire to fail completely. They had been driving for about 20 minutes, just beginning to hope that they might actually escape, when they encountered the roadblock. It wasn't an official roadblock, no police cars or emergency vehicles. Instead, a large tree had fallen across the narrow mountain road, completely blocking their path. The tree was massive, easily 3 feet in diameter, and there was no way their SUV could drive around it or over it. "That wasn't there when we came up here," Tyler said grimly, putting the car in park and staring at the obstacle. Madison felt her last hope crumble. "It's not a coincidence, is it? Someone put it there." Tyler was already getting out of the car to examine the tree more closely. Madison watched him walk around the massive trunk, and even from inside the car she could see his shoulders slump in defeat. "The cut is fresh," he called back to her. "This tree was cut down deliberately, probably sometime last night." Madison climbed out of the car and joined him, though she already knew what she would find. The tree had been felled with professional precision, cut in exactly the right place, to block the road completely, while making it look like a natural occurrence to anyone who didn't examine it closely. "They planned this," she said quietly. "Whoever they are, they've been planning this from the beginning." Tyler nodded, his face set in grim lines. "The question is why? What do they want from us?" Before Madison could answer, they heard the sound of vehicles approaching from behind them. Multiple engines moving at steady speeds up the mountain road they had just traveled. Someone was coming, and given everything that had happened, Madison was certain it wasn't help. "The trees," Tyler said urgently, grabbing her hand. "We need to hide." They abandoned their SUV and plunged into the forest beside the road, moving as quickly and quietly as they could through the underbrush. Behind them, Madison could hear the vehicles getting closer, at least 2, possibly 3 engines approaching their abandoned car. They found a large fallen log about 50 yards from the road and crouched behind it, trying to control their breathing while they listened to what was happening. The vehicles had stopped, and Madison could hear car doors slamming and voices speaking in low, urgent tones. "Search the area," someone called out, a man's voice, authoritative and calm. "They can't have gone far on foot." Madison felt Tyler's hand tighten on hers. Whoever these people were, they knew that she and Tyler had been in the car. This wasn't a coincidence or a case of mistaken identity. They were being hunted. The next few hours passed in a blur of terror and desperate flight through the forest. Madison and Tyler moved as carefully as they could, trying to put distance between themselves and their pursuers while avoiding making enough noise to give away their location. But it quickly became clear that they were outmatched. The people hunting them knew the forest intimately. They moved with confidence and coordination, communicating with hand signals and staying in contact with what appeared to be radios or walkie-talkies. Madison and Tyler, meanwhile, were city people with limited wilderness experience, crashing through underbrush and leaving clear signs of their passage. By mid-afternoon, exhausted and dehydrated, they found themselves at the edge of a small clearing. Madison was ready to collapse, and Tyler wasn't much better. They needed rest, water, and most of all, they needed help. "I think we lost them," Tyler whispered, though Madison could hear the uncertainty in his voice. They were wrong. The attack came from 3 directions at once, coordinated and swift. Madison had just enough time to see several figures in dark clothing emerging from the trees before something struck Tyler in the head, and he collapsed to the ground. Madison screamed and tried to run, but strong hands grabbed her arms and held her in place. She struggled frantically, calling Tyler's name, but he wasn't moving. "Please," she gasped, looking around at the faces of their captors. They were men and women of various ages, all dressed in dark, practical clothing, all wearing expressions of grim determination rather than malice. "Please, we don't know anything. We're just here on our honeymoon. We won't tell anyone about this place." One of the men, older than the others, with graying hair and weathered features, stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice was not unkind, but it carried the weight of absolute finality. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "but you've seen too much. You know about the trail, about our presence here. We can't let you leave." Madison felt the world spinning around her. "What are you talking about? What trail? We don't understand any of this." The older man exchanged glances with the others, and Madison saw something that might have been genuine regret in his expression. "This land has been our sanctuary for more than 30 years, he said quietly. "We came here to escape a world that had become too complicated, too connected, too watched. We've built something here, a community, a way of life that exists outside the systems that control everyone else." Madison stared at him, trying to process what he was telling her. You're what, some kind of cult?" "We're people who chose a different path," the man corrected. "People who decided that the only way to truly be free was to disappear completely from the world we were born into. We've been here for decades, completely off the grid, completely invisible to the outside world." "But the cabin," Madison protested. "The Airbnb listing, how did we—" "The cabin is bait," another voice said. This was a woman, perhaps in her 40s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that held no warmth at all. "We maintain it. We list it periodically. We select our visitors very carefully." Madison felt sick. "Select them for what?" The older man answered, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine sorrow. "For recruitment when possible, for disposal when necessary." The words hit Madison like a physical blow. She looked down at Tyler, who was still unconscious on the ground, blood seeping from a wound on his head. "So you're going to kill us?" "Not if you choose to stay," the woman said. Not if you choose to join us to become part of what we've built here. But you can never leave, never contact the outside world again, never let anyone know that this place exists. Madison felt hysteria rising in her throat. You're insane. People will look for us, our families, our jobs, the rental company. We'll find evidence that you left the cabin safely and continued on your trip, the older man interrupted. We've done this before. We know how to make disappearances look voluntary. Madison was shaking now, understanding finally why they had been chosen, why the cabin had seemed too perfect, why everything about this place had felt wrong from the beginning. How many? She whispered. How many people have you done this to? The man didn't answer directly. Some choose to stay and build new lives with us. Others, he shrugged sadly. Others make a different choice. Madison looked around at the faces surrounding her, and for the first time she noticed something that chilled her to the bone. Some of them were young, much younger than the others. People who might have been her age or Tyler's age when they first came here. People who might have arrived thinking they were on vacation and ended up trapped in this nightmare. You can't do this, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. This is kidnapping, this is murder. This is survival, the woman replied coldly. Ours and yours. The choice is simple. Join us willingly, or be made to disappear permanently. Madison looked down at Tyler again, and this time she saw his eyes flutter open. He was conscious, listening, understanding what was being offered and what was being threatened. How long do we have to decide? Tyler asked weakly, struggling to sit up. Until sunset, the older man replied. If you choose to stay, you'll be given shelter, food, work to do, and a place in our community. If you choose to try to leave... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, Madison and Tyler, Matthews faced the most impossible choice of their lives. Stay and become prisoners in this hidden community, cut off forever from everyone they had ever loved, or refuse and face the consequences. In the end, neither choice mattered. When the rescue teams finally found the cabin 3 days later, alerted by Madison's mother when the couple failed to return as scheduled, they discovered a scene that defied explanation. The door was locked from the inside, their belongings were neatly packed as if for departure, and there was no sign of struggle or violence. The mysterious trail that Tyler and Madison had discovered was gone, leaving no trace that it had ever existed. The slashed tires had been repaired. Their car was in the driveway, keys in the ignition, as if they had simply chosen to walk into the forest and never return. The investigation that followed found no evidence of foul play, no indication of where the couple had gone, and no explanation for their disappearance. The case was eventually classified as a voluntary missing persons case, though their families never stopped believing that something terrible had happened to them. The cabin was removed from all rental platforms and has remained empty ever since. But sometimes on quiet nights when the mist rolls through the mountains, local residents report seeing lights moving through the forest, lights that follow paths that don't appear on any map, leading to places that officially don't exist. And sometimes, very rarely, hikers in the area report hearing voices carried on the wind, young voices calling for help from somewhere deep, in the trees where no help can possibly reach them. The truth about what happened to Madison and Tyler Matthews remains buried somewhere in those mountains, along with secrets that a hidden community will kill to protect. Their families continue to search for answers, but the forest keeps its silence, and some mysteries are never meant to be solved. In a world where everything is tracked, recorded, and monitored, it's still possible for people to simply vanish, without a trace. And for those who choose to make them disappear, the perfect crime is one that never looks like a crime at all. If this story has touched your heart, if you felt the fear and desperation of Madison and Tyler, if you found yourself holding your breath with hope and dread, please don't let their story end here. Share this video with someone you love, because sometimes the most important conversations we can have are about the dangers we never see coming. Hit that subscribe button to join our community of truth seekers, people who believe that every missing person deserves to have their story told, their memory honored, and their families supported. Your subscription helps us continue investigating cases like this one, bringing attention to the disappeared and the forgotten. And please, Leave a comment below. Tell us what you think happened to Madison and Tyler. Share your own experiences with places that felt too perfect, too isolated, too good to be true. Sometimes the most important clues come from the people who are brave enough to share their own encounters with the impossible. Because in the end, we're all just trying to make sense of a world where people can vanish without a trace, where love stories can become cautionary tales, and where the most beautiful places can hide the darkest secrets. Stay safe out there, trust your instincts, and remember, some getaways are too good to be true.